Hey everybody, this is TV Magic, and today I wanted to talk to you guys about building scales and chords and how knowing how to do that will enhance your songwriting. Now, I'm sure a lot of you know some of the theory behind how to build chords and how to develop chords from a particular scale. So I figured what we'd do is we'd take a theoretical approach first and kind of work our way from just the easy C major scale and build a 1-4-5-1 progression out of that, so you can see the scales relationship to the chords. And then after that, we'll talk about how to manipulate just there from there really simply. And then after that, we'll basically go right into creating a new scale that is our own, coming up with our own chords that fit into our new scale, and then using all of the chords that are available to make a new melody and chord progression work with the new scale. And then what we'll do is just kind of put it all together there at the end and show you how you can really be creative and make your own kind of new sound just by experimenting and having fun. There's a lot of things about Fruity Loops and DAWs that really make it easy for you to be creative. So without further ado, let's break right down into it, and hopefully this will be pretty quick for you. The first thing is a C major scale, so let's start there. So a C major scale is all of the white notes on the piano in one octave. It sounds like this. Now we all know this. It's really familiar, super simple. It's basically 3 whole steps and a half step, then two whole steps, half step, then 3 whole steps and a half step. And what that means is a whole step is from this note to this note, and a half step is from this note to that note. So a half step is to the note immediately next to it, and a whole step is 2 notes away. Simple as that. So basically from here, we can make a chord progression that uses all of the notes that are in this scale, which are 7. There's 7 here. It looks like a lot more, but it's the first 7, and then this C just repeats. And here's what that looks like. So this is a chord progression that uses all the notes in the scale. Yeah, and we all know that one. That's pretty common. And if you play them together, you get something that sounds a little bit like this. Yeah, and that's nice and simple, it's starting to sound a little bit more musical there. It doesn't just sound like blocks, chords, and just a scale, but still not quite there yet. There's also all sorts of interesting things that you can do just from here to kind of just get your mind going. So for instance, let's take that same chord progression, but what I did was I changed the bass line. So here, let's look at it. That's what it looks like normally. See, we have this C, F, G, C. And what I've done is I've changed that to A, D, E, A. The top 3 notes of each chord are exactly the same, but what I've done is change the bass line to just kind of voice how the chords work. Here's what that sounds like. Nope, sorry about that. It will actually sound like this. Yeah, and you can see that's quite a bit different. If you add the C major scale over the top of that, you really hear how it kind of colors the scale now. And let's compare that. Yeah, so see how now it kind of has this sort of like, I'm not sure if it's sad or if it's happy sound, which I really like. Another way you can kind of further that is you can just use the same scale, the same notes rather in the scale, and just move them down to their relative minor. And the relative minor of C major is A. And basically the reason that this is so easy to pick out is if you start with the first note in the scale and you just go down 2 notes, than you will be on the relative minor if you play all of the same notes. So this is a C major scale, but I just started it on A instead using all the white notes. Yeah. And when you get that over the top of the new alternative bass line, you get this sound. Which sounds quite a bit different than just the regular C major. All right. Now, just to give you a quick, simple idea of how I built these chords up. The best way to understand where chords come from is, let's look at the C major scale one more time real quick. I just want to make this real fast for those of you who don't know, because it is simple and you don't need to think about it too hard. A chord is every other note in a scale. So, and as long as there's 3 notes, it's considered a chord. So if you have C, E, and G, which is literally the first note, the third note, and the 5th note, you get the 1 chord, C, E, G, C major. If you start on the D and you do every other note, D, F, A, you get a different sounding chord based off of the intervals of note to note within the scale. And this kind of sets up standard chords within the key that you can expect. And it's the first chord would be a major one, so then you get a minor one, and another minor one, and then a major one, and then another major one, and then a minor one, and then a diminished one. Yeah. And that's just trying to get simple. I kind of forgot to do it earlier, but now you have it now. Let's move on to building our own scale. As a rule of thumb, I never try to put more than a single half step in a row. So if I go starting on C, go to D, that's great. Then I have a half step. I don't want to follow that by that, because then those 3 notes basically so condensed together, they clash harmonically if you're trying to build chords off of them. Unless you're trying to build color chords, and there's a whole lot of other things to get into with that. But if you're just trying to stay simple to get started, you want to keep it this way. So, and then I skipped 2 here, and it's actually a step and a half. Put another half step there, whole step. And this ends up sounding kind of strange, which I like. This is why I did it, is to try and do something really different. So here's what this scale sounds like. Yeah, it's like kind of Middle Eastern, kind of regular, kind of, I don't know. It's just a nice kind of minor scale, and it has a lot of close notes that allow for a lot of interesting sounds. So now, let's take that scale and let's build some chords underneath it. Now, I did this the exact same way I did it with the C major scale and building the 1-4-5-1. Essentially what I'm doing now, though, is I was using the notes that were in the scale, which are... Oh. And I used those notes to just kind of build a chord progression that I felt would work. And I ended up coming up with something like this. And I just really played around with them until my ears were happy, you know? All right. Now, let's hear that chord progression with the scale over the top of it. Now, obviously there at the end it doesn't quite work out to the way my ear likes, but that's because I have the chords changing on a little later. So now, from there, I decided, okay, I've got an interesting chord progression right here. having two of the same chord in there kind of makes it a little static. So I figured that'd be a good kind of like final cadence ultimately, something to end it with. So what I did was I came up with a melody based off of the scale, and it looks like and sounds this. If I was better at this, it would be obvious. Here's what it sounds like. Yeah, nice and simple. And this is with the same exact chords underneath it. Yeah, that sounds quite a bit nicer. The chords feel a little bit more justified fitting in that way. Now, what I did right here, just real quick, was I brought the scale in. And you can see it's this bottom note of each chord here. Now what I did is I did a whole octave, and I just did every other note stacked. So you could see all 7 possible chords within the key, ending with the same C on top here. And that's what this sounds like. Yeah, so we have a bunch of really dissonant chords, a lot of really minor sounds. But we also have some major ones in there that add some really nice flair that are kind of almost in the middle of nowhere. Also note this chord right here, because there's 2 spaces between each note, that's a diminished chord, and that ends up being kind of a non-functional chord. So this one is a really nice color chord, but it might not be the best if you're just trying to keep it simple. And for the same reasons, this chord, having 3 notes between, or 3 spaces between each note, is an augmented chord, which actually kind of does the same thing. Except you get more of a dreamy aspect, and the diminished chord's more evil, kind of, I don't know, like just unstable. You get this kind of sound comparison. It's kind of, I don't know, just kind of like a train. And then you have the augmented. It's a little bit more like Star Trek, Yeah, Star Trek. That's the augmented chord, is that sound. But basically what I did is I took these chords and I worked around with them a little bit more until I found another progression that I liked. And that ended up sounding something like this. Yeah, and that's using all the chords that were available before. And then I decided to come up with a new melody based off of that, using the scale again. And yeah, here's what that sounds like. Yeah. And with the chords. I really like that. All right. And now I've basically just kind of given you the quick rundown, and I've taken these chord progressions that I've made up and these 2 melodies, and I've kind of just built a basic little song. I've got the second chord progression happening once, twice, 3 times, followed by the kind of final one that happened over here with the final melody happening last, and the melody above it. And so you kind of get a small song. So this is what 16 bars sounds like now. All right. So there we have what sounds like kind of a song. It sounds pretty classical on the piano, and honestly, I've used some pretty like classical ideas whenever building my chords, which I like to do because it just helps kind of keep them, tight. You see all the chords of them, and rather than doing them all in root position, which would look a lot different. This keeps them compressed and keeps the voices close, which makes them sound smoother. And just makes it easier to look at. Like I can look at this and say, oh, there's a C minor chord right there. And so just by glancing real quick, I get a good idea of what I'm working with in the song. So then what I did after that was I pretty much just added a bunch of instruments to what the piano was already doing, and then at the end, I decided I took the piano out. So I'm using the bass that I came up with, the new chords that I came up with, and the new scale with all the melodies that I came up with in that scale, and I'm just using that piano part to build a totally different kind of sound off of it. And I'll show you how I did that real quick. So, just to do it simply, we'll loop a little bit here. All right. So basically, it starts off with just that piano part. And it's on loop right now, as you can hear. The first thing I do is I go ahead and add in a sub bass line because that's just what I like, and it kind of helps me establish some like basic strong rhythms that I wanted to hear within it. Now once I have that established and I know that my low end is going to be taken care of, I brought in a kind of slap bass synth that I'll use as like a secondary bass line to kind of reinforce the subwoofer and add a little bit more intrigue to the low end. Sounds a lot like this. Turn that piano down. Yeah. And then from there, I did a couple other things, like instead of having the chords in the pan, I decided to make them a little guitar synth and have them kind of strum the chords, so you get this kind of sound. And if you look, I did not change the chords at all. All I did was just make them to where you have eighth note climbs on each one. And it's just that simple, and it just makes it sound quite a bit different. And then basically I just replaced the melodies with a couple trade-offs. I have two melodies that kind of trade back and forth. So you kind of get this sound with one. Yeah, and then we'll double it up with the other one. Yeah, and then I'll just go ahead and do all the drums at once here and just let you hear what it sounds like all together. This is what the 16 bars sounded like after I just spent about an hour just kind of fiddling with what was already there on the piano and just trying to come up with something new on all the other instruments. Yeah, and as you can see, I added a whole drum kit. I got a bunch of crash cymbals and hi-hats and a couple snares and a kick drum. But I feel like it all came together really well, and this is just a really simple way to just start building something new that you feel good about. That sounds fresh. I think that's really important as composers, is to constantly be making new sounding music. And so if you can explore some of the more unpopular scales, maybe make up your own, you're guaranteed going to be creating something new and fun, and that's what we're all here for, right? Yeah. Well, anyways, I'll play this for you. Let me get the piano turned off and let you guys hear what it sounds like. If I can remember how to push buttons. Piano off. Yeah, there you go. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun putting this together, and hopefully you found something in here interesting that can help you out in some way or another.